Alright, welcome to section 5.2. Before we dive into the new material, I just wanted to review a couple questions from the previous assignment that were commonly missed. So the first one here is this end behavior, and I'm not sure exactly what happens, but the key is look for the highest exponent, which is a 4, right? And that's an even, alright? And then whatever's in front of it is negative, so it's an even negative. And I always think back to like negative x squared, which just looks like this, right? It's the parabola upside down. And then negative x to the fourth is the same thing, just a little bit curvier, right? So it's got kind of some extra curves. But the idea is it's still got the same end behavior of down and down, right? Because on both ends it's down, whether it's squared, fourth, sixth. If it's even negative, it's going to be down and down, right? So the answer to that one's down and down. All right, one other quick one here. A lot of students end up thinking this is a trinomial because there's 3 parts, which is somewhat logical, but you should combine the like terms. So really, once you do clean it up a little bit, now we have a binomial, and it's to the first power, so it's a linear binomial. All right, new stuff. So we're on 5.2 today. We are still dealing with polynomials, but we want to understand the connection between their solutions, x-intercepts, and factored form. All right, and so there's a note sheet that goes with this, and you can either print it off or just take notes in your notebook. But if you look, it'll give you one of the parts. So we have the graph, the zeros are solutions, which are really the same thing, factored form and standard form. All right, and so if we know one of the parts, we should be able to fill in the rest. So like, this third example here, we know the zeros, so we're going to fill in the rest of the parts. All right, so I'm just going to dive into these, and hopefully the connection will start to make sense as you go. And in fact, you probably already know this. Like if you know standard form here, you should be able to figure out factored form here, right? So I'm going to say pause the video here and see if you can figure out factored form. And if you can get that, maybe what are the solutions? All right, so hopefully factored form, we know that there's no GCF, but we can do x and x for the x squared, and then multiply to 10 and add to 7 would be 2 and 5. All right, so you have x plus 2 times x plus 5. Right, and then to get the solutions, you set each little factor to 0. Use that zero product property, where if these two things multiply to 0, then either the first part has to be a 0, or the second part has to be a 0. And then you just minus 2. That's 1, 0, or solution. And then there's a second 0 or solution called negative 5. All right, so those are the solutions or zeros of this polynomial. Okay, and as far as the graph goes, I'm just going to put it up here so I can fit it all on the same screen, is the graph. I'm not super worried about like how detailed you draw a graph here or anything like that. All I want you to know is the basics of this, which is these numbers, besides being zeros or solutions, these are the x-intercepts when you graph. Intercepts. Okay, so it's going to be where it crosses on the x-axis. So all I'm really going to draw here is it crosses at -2 and it crosses at -5, right? Because those are the solutions. All right, and so that's sort of a tie between the solutions and the graph, is that on the graph they're the x-intercepts. And then to complete the rest of the graph, you could use your calculator or Desmos, or you could just say this is positive x squared, so we know it's going to be a parabola facing up. So it's going to look something like that, crossing at -5 and -2. Again, the big thing is to understand the connections. So all your zeros or solutions are your x-intercepts, where it crosses on the x-axis. All right, this one would be a good one for you to try first. See if you can fill in any of these other parts. The graph you should be able to do for sure, because you can just do that on Desmo, so that should be pretty straightforward. So pause the video, give this one a shot before unpausing. All right, so what's sort of different here is it's an x cubed, so we're going to have 3 factors and 3 solutions, right? And the first thing to factor out is the GCF. So they all have an x in them. So I'm going to pull that to the front first. And then from there, I'm going to keep the x in front. And then these rest of it, the trinomial part, this factors like we've done a bunch where x and x to make the x squared, and then multiply to negative 14 and add up to negative 5. So in this case, I believe that would be negative 7 and positive 2. Again, make the list if you're not sure. Okay, and now we're going to get 3 answers. So hopefully you can figure out if you set x minus 7 to 0, one answer is 7. And x plus 2, set that to 0. And then you get an answer of negative 2. And then the last one is kind of weird, because again, there should be 3 answers if it's an x cubed. Is this times x? Basically, if you have a times x, that leads to an answer of x equals 0. You can kind of see that because if we imagine this x to be 0, we have 0 times negative 7 times 2, and that for sure is going to equal 0. So if you have an x here, just make it 0, and then boom, the whole expression will come out as 0. So that is our last answer. Okay, and then again, those are called zeros or solutions. And graphically, again, they're the x-intercepts. So this one should cross at 0, positive 7. Okay, I got 7 there, and negative 2. So negative 2, 0, 7. And then as far as the shape goes, again, you can use your calculator. The graph is really not the main part of this lesson. I kind of do a quick graph, which is, if you can remember what the basic x cubed from yesterday looks like, right? If it's positive x cubed, it looks like that. So I'm just going to draw that shape through my points, and that's roughly a sketch of what the graph of this polynomial looks like. All right, next up, the next example then is we're going to kind of reverse this process. So we've been factoring and solving, but now we're going to start with the answers and list the factors. So first thing is to kind of realize how these are backwards, like this plus 7. If you have 7 as an answer, you must have had x minus 7 as a factor. Similarly, if you had negative 2 as an answer, you must have x plus 2 as a factor. Okay, so on this one, example 3, we are starting with the zeros or solutions. And you have to find factored form and then standard form. So pause the video and see if you can find, if these are our answers, what must be our little factors. All right, first thing to realize is there's 3 answers. So we're going to have 3 factors, and it's going to be x cubed in standard form, right? And if 4 is an answer, then that must have came from an x minus 4 factor. If there's a minus 2, there must be an x plus 2 factor, and then for positive 1, it must be x minus 1. Right? If you set those to 0 and solve them, you'd get these answers. Right? And if you really struggle with that, you could say like, well, if x is 4, if I minus 4 from both sides, I would get x minus 4 has to be 0, and that would give us this little factor here. Right? That's getting a little needless amount of work there, but I hope you understand. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so the hardest part of this lesson now is to get this into standard form. And so the trick is we have to multiply all of these. But to help us out, we're going to just multiply these two first, and then multiply that result by x minus 1. Okay, so we're going to FOIL these to get x squared plus 2x minus 4x and minus 8. And then put the 2 together in the middle. Okay, so I got multiplied the first 2, and now I'm going to bring down the x minus 1. Okay, and now I got to multiply these 3 things, all of them by x minus 1. So we could do like a crazy super FOIL here. That would certainly be acceptable. However, I find that it gets hard because it just gets kind of messy. So what I end up doing is drawing like a 3x2 box and use that to organize my work when I multiply them. So here's my box, and on the top I put the x minus 1, this binomial. The trinomial goes on the side. All right, and then I just, for each square, I fill them in. So x squared times x, multiply those together, negative 1 times x squared, negative 2x times x, negative 2x squared, negative 2x times negative 1, negative 8 times x, and negative 1 times negative 8. Okay, and then my answer will be combining all these like terms. So hopefully we can see we've got some x to the first here, and then some x squareds there. Sorry, my pen is messing up. And so our final standard form here is we have a single x cubed, and we have negative 3x squareds, and negative 6x, and let's see, that's positive 8. Okay, and that's our standard form polynomial. And we got that by multiplying all the factor form together. Okay, as far as the graph goes, again, that's not really the focus of this lesson, but I can sketch it here quick for you. The big thing to know graphically is that these zeros are where it crosses on the x-axis. So we cross at 4, negative 2, and 1. And this is critical because that solve method, like to solve a polynomial, you can just graph it and find where it crosses on the x-axis, and those are your answers. So the whole point of this lesson is not be able to do it really, but to understand that idea that one of the ways, like if I gave you this on the test and said solve, you could say, hey, I'm going to graph it on my calculator, right? And when I get this picture, oh, I can see my three answers are right there wherever it crosses, negative 2, 1, 4, and boom, I got my solutions, right? So understanding how it all ties together is really the main part of this lesson. All right, let's flip over to the back and do at least one example from here. This one starts in factored form, all right, and then see if you can fill in the other parts. All right, one thing that's a little different on this one is you have two x minus 1 factors. So when you set those to 0, you get x equals 1, but you get that answer twice, right? So this is actually a fancy word. So we say that the solution 1 has a multiplicity of 2. And so it's just a repeated answer. So if there was 3 ones, you'd have a multiplicity of 3, blah, 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 blah. But that fancy vocab word just means like a repeated answer. Okay, and then we've got x equals negative 5, and that's just a single answer. Okay, and that is significant for a couple reasons. One, when you do the graph of this, what actually happens is it's going to bounce at the multiplicity. So if this one has 3 answers, so it's a cube shape again, that squiggle we've been drawing, that shape. And it's going to cross at negative 5 for sure. And then at 1, normally it would like make 2 answers, but instead it's going to bounce. So we're going to say it kind of hits there twice. And normally it would dip back down and make 2 answers, but on this one it bounces. So that's what a multiplicity will look like graphically. It's kind of counted as like a double answer. All right, final part on this one then is to do standard form. And much like the last question, you got to multiply them all together. So start by foiling the first two. And this one has kind of a nice feature. So you have x squared minus 1x. Oh, actually, it doesn't. Minus another x. I thought the middle two would cancel out here, but they don't. Plus 1. So you get x squared minus 2x plus 1. Okay, and then we got to take that times x plus 5. So draw the box again and do the multiplication. All right, so along the side here we have the trinomial. So I'm going to do the x squared, the negative 2x, and the plus 1. Along the top goes the binomial x plus 5. And then just fill in the parts. X squared times x, 5 times x squared, negative 2x times x, negative 2x times 5, and 1 times x, 5 times 1. Okay, and generally you'll get some like terms. So these are like terms and those are like terms. So combine them all together for standard form, which gives us x cubed plus 3x squared minus 9x plus 5. Right, and so now we got standard form by multiplying them all together. Again, the main part of this lesson is to understand how this all fits together, right? So on this particular question, I believe we started with the factored form and then we found all the rest of the parts, right? And so understanding those connections is the whole point for this lesson. All right, hopefully that made sense. Sorry, I can't.